My prison cellmate made me feel attraction toward men, and I ended up liking it. The first time I stepped inside that cold concrete cell, I thought my life was over. The clang of the bars behind me felt like the final note in a song I never wanted to hear. Prison wasn't just a punishment, it was a new world, harsh and unforgiving. But what I didn't expect was that inside those walls, I would find something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Something that scared me, confused me, but also made my heart beat in a way I couldn't ignore. He was my cellmate, a man I never thought I'd even talk to beyond necessity. Yet, the silence of the nights, the sound of our breathing echoing against the walls, and the way his eyes seemed to catch mine when the lights dimmed, it started to change me. Slowly, what began as fear and distrust turned into a strange sense of comfort. And comfort became curiosity. That curiosity grew into something I couldn't define, but it pulled me closer every day. This is not just a story about prison life. This is about how two people, trapped in the same cage, found a connection they never thought possible. It's about desire, vulnerability, and the courage to face what you truly feel even when the world tells you it's wrong. Stay with me as I share how a single decision inside those iron walls made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and led me into the most unexpected journey of my life. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe now and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss a single chapter of this story. Each one brings you closer to the truth of what really happened in that cell. The first night inside that cell was the longest of my life. The air was heavy with the smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat and iron, and every sound seemed amplified. The distant slam of a gate, the echo of guards' boots against the corridor, the low murmur of men trying to claim a sliver of sleep. I sat on the lower bunk, staring at the wall, feeling like the world I once knew had been cut away clean, leaving me raw and exposed. I didn't look at him right away. My cellmate was stretched out on the top bunk, his breathing steady, almost too steady, as if he wanted me to know he wasn't sleeping, that he was just waiting. In those first hours, I convinced myself that I wouldn't speak unless I had to. Words were currency here, and I wasn't sure what they might cost me. But as dawn bled pale light through the narrow window, I stole a glance at him. He wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone rougher, maybe older, hardened by time inside. Instead, he looked like he could have been walking free on the outside just yesterday, late 20s, tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and eyes that seemed too alive for a place like this. His presence filled the room in a way that was both unsettling and strangely reassuring. "Name's Carter," he said finally, his voice low, as though the walls themselves were listening. I hesitated before answering. "Daniel." He nodded once, as if filing it away. Then silence reclaimed the space. Days blurred quickly inside. You learn the rhythm fast. Count, chow, yard, back to the cell. Carter was quiet, but not unfriendly. He had a way of moving that made other inmates step aside, not out of fear, but respect. It didn't take long for me to realize that being his cellmate was a kind of shield. Fights passed me by. Trouble skipped over me. And for reasons I didn't understand, he never asked for anything in return. That should have been enough. Safety. Neutrality. But in the quiet of the evenings, when conversation between us was sparse and the rest of the prison roared beyond our door, I began to notice things I couldn't ignore. The way his shoulders shifted when he sat on the edge of the bunk. The way his laugh, rare but real, made the cell feel less like a cage. And the way his eyes lingered on mine a second longer than they should when we spoke. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was just grateful for the protection, for the companionship, for not being completely alone. But late at night, lying awake on the bottom bunk while he shifted above me, I couldn't stop my mind from wandering to places it had never dared go before. One evening, the tension between us slipped through without warning. We were sitting across from each other, him on the bunk, me on the small metal chair bolted to the floor. The conversation had been light, about books, of all things. He had asked me what I used to read on the outside. I admitted I hadn't read much. He smiled faintly, said he used to love Steinbeck. Then the silence fell again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one pressed closer, warmer, heavier. His gaze stayed on me, and I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was as if he saw something in me I didn't even know was there. "You're not like the others," he said softly, his voice almost too low to catch. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You don't hide behind some act. You're just you. And you don't even realize what that does to people." I should have laughed it off, or dismissed it. Instead, my throat went dry. "Does what?" Carter's lips curved into a half-smile, the kind that said he knew something I didn't. He didn't answer. He just sat back, eyes still locked on mine, and the silence stretched until my heartbeat was the loudest thing in the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in the dim light, the shadow of that smile, the weight of those words. It made no sense. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, not here, not with him, not with another man. I tried to convince myself it was just the isolation, the loneliness, the hunger for human connection. But deep down I knew it was more. The turning point came a few nights later. Lights out had fallen, and I was half asleep when I felt movement above me. Carter shifted, climbed down, and sat on the edge of my bunk. The mattress dipped under his weight, and suddenly, the small space between us felt electric. "You're restless," he said quietly. I froze. Couldn't sleep. "Me neither." His tone carried something unspoken, something that made the air between us vibrate. I turned my head toward him, and even in the dark, I could see the outline of his jaw, the faint glint of his eyes catching the light from the hallway. For a moment, we just sat there, breathing the same air, hearts beating in an unsteady rhythm. Then his hand brushed mine, barely, almost accidental. But it wasn't. The contact sent a shock through me, sharp and undeniable. My breath caught and I couldn't move. Carter didn't pull away. He let the silence answer for him. And that was the moment everything changed. The morning after his hand brushed mine, I woke up with the strangest mix of dread and anticipation. The cell was the same, gray walls, thin mattress, air heavy with the scent of bleach, but something in me had shifted. I caught myself replaying that moment again and again. The weight of him sitting close, the warmth of his hand against mine, the way he didn't flinch or make excuses. Carter moved around the cell as if nothing had happened. He tied his boots, ran his hand through his hair, stretched his arms, all with that same calmness he always carried. I kept waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge it. But he didn't. Maybe that was his way of giving me a choice. Pretend it never happened or face the truth of what I felt. In the yard later that day, I tried to focus on keeping my head down, blending in. But I could feel him nearby, the way he walked a few steps behind me, the way his eyes scanned the crowd while mine stayed fixed on the ground. He was watching out for me, as always, and part of me hated how safe it made me feel. We sat together on the bleachers, the sun sharp against the razor wire above. "You're too tense," Carter said, his voice casual but steady. "I'm in prison," I muttered. "What do you expect?" He chuckled softly. "There's tense and then there's you. You look like your skin doesn't fit." I turned my head sharply, but he wasn't mocking me. His gaze was direct, searching, almost kind. I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. That evening, back in the cell, he surprised me. "You ever think about what you miss most?" he asked, lying on the top bunk with his hands behind his head. "Food," I said quickly, deflecting. "Real food. My mom's chicken and rice." He smiled. "Yeah. Food's a good one. For me, it's touch." The word hung in the air, heavier than the bars on the door. I swallowed hard, heat rising to my face. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I already knew. "Don't look at me like that," Carter added, his voice softer now. "I'm not talking about sex. I mean simple things. A hand on your shoulder. A hug when you need it. People don't realize how much those things keep you human until they're gone." I turned on my bunk, facing the wall, but his words wouldn't leave me. The absence of it had been gnawing at me for months, though I never dared admit it. And now, with him in the bunk above me, all I could think about was the one moment he'd bridged that silence with his hand against mine. The days that followed grew stranger. We looked more about music, about family, about regrets we carried like chains heavier than the ones around our wrists. Carter had a way of opening up pieces of himself slowly, carefully, like he was peeling back layers only for me to see. And in those moments, I forgot where we were. But the closer we grew, the more restless I became. At night, I found myself waiting for him to climb down again, waiting for his hand to find mine. Some nights he did, some nights he didn't. The inconsistency drove me insane, leaving me questioning what he wanted, what I wanted, and if either of us was brave enough to say it out loud. Then came the moment that shattered whatever walls I'd been clinging to. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were lined up for chow. The line stretched down the corridor, bodies packed tight, the smell of sweat and canned beans thick in the air. An inmate behind me shoved me hard, muttering something about me being too slow. I stumbled forward, catching myself on the wall. Before I could react, Carter spun around, his eyes flashing, his hand pushing the guy back with enough force to send him reeling. "Don't touch him," Carter said, his tone sharp, dangerous. The corridor went silent. The other inmate sneered but backed off, muttering curses as the line shuffled forward again. My pulse hammered in my throat. Nobody had ever defended me like that, not in here, not out there. And the way Carter had done it, with such raw intensity, left no doubt in anyone's mind. I wasn't just his cellmate. I was someone he was willing to fight for. Back in the cell, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. "Why did you do that?" I asked, my voice breaking the quiet. Carter shrugged, sitting on his bunk. "Because he crossed a line." "That's not what I mean. You could have gotten yourself written up. Worse." He looked at me, then really looked, his jaw tight. "Some things are worth it." The silence that followed was unbearable. My chest ached with words I couldn't say, questions I was terrified to ask. Finally, I forced one out. "Carter, what are we doing?" He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on mine. "You tell me, Daniel. Because I'm not the one who can't sleep at night." His words hit me like a punch. How could he know? How could he see through me so easily? I opened my mouth to answer, but the sound of boots clanging down the corridor cut me off. A guard rattled the bars, barking orders for evening count. Carter stood, his expression unreadable, and stepped toward the door. But just before he turned his back, he paused. His hand brushed mine again, deliberate this time, lingering longer than before. And in that instant, the question I'd been running from burned through me with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about safety. It wasn't just about loneliness. I wanted him. And he knew it. After that night, when Carter let his hand linger on mine in plain defiance of the guard's footsteps outside, something inside me broke open. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just two men clinging to scraps of comfort in a place built to strip us bare. But every time our hands brushed, every time our eyes locked for a second too long, it became harder to hide from the truth. I wasn't just drawn to him. I was pulled, the way a tide drags the shore, steady and relentless. Days in prison are measured not by clocks but by patterns: count, meals, yard, lockdown. Each cycle blurred into the next, yet my awareness of Carter sharpened like a blade. I noticed how he leaned against the wall during yard time, scanning the chaos with a calm that didn't belong here. I noticed how he gave half his cornbread to me without asking, as if it were natural. And I noticed how my heart betrayed me every time his shoulder brushed mine in the crowded corridor. But I didn't dare name it. Not yet. One evening, as the cell buzzed faintly with echoes of distant arguments and the metallic hum of fluorescent lights, Carter spoke without looking at me. "You ever wonder who you are without all this?" I glanced up from the dog-eared book he'd given me. "What do you mean?" He lay stretched out on the top bunk, his voice drifting down. "Without the bars. Without the number on your chest. Without people telling you what you can and can't be." His words struck deeper than I expected. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "I guess I never thought about it. I was just surviving." Carter shifted, leaning over the edge of his bunk until his face hovered above mine. His eyes, dark and steady, held me captive. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you never let yourself think about it." The air thickened. My throat tightened. For a moment, it felt like he was peeling me apart, layer by layer, with nothing but his gaze. "I don't know who I am," I whispered, surprising even myself. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then maybe it's time you find out." The silence that followed was unbearable. I turned back to my book, but the words blurred. That night, sleep was impossible. It was 2 nights later when everything came to a head. The yard was crowded, tension in the air sharper than usual. Rumors had spread of a fight brewing between 2 groups, and the guards paced with their hands already hovering near batons. Carter and I stayed near the far fence, keeping our distance, but unease coiled in my stomach. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice steady. I nodded, but before I could say anything, the first punch landed. Chaos erupted instantly, shouts, fists, bodies colliding. The guards surged forward, whistles blaring. I stumbled back, heart racing, trying to keep my head down. Then someone shoved me hard from behind. I slammed into the fence, breath knocked out of me. My vision blurred, and when it cleared, I saw a fist raised, ready to strike again. Before it could land, Carter was there. He shoved the guy back with a force that sent him sprawling. But the move drew attention, too much of it. Suddenly, 2 more men rushed him, fists flying. "Carter!" I shouted, panic searing my chest. He fought back with precision, his body moving like he'd done this 1,000 times. But numbers weren't on his side. I saw a blade flash, a makeshift shiv pulled from someone's waistband. My blood ran cold. The guards hadn't reached us yet. It was seconds, maybe less, between that blade and Carter. Instinct took over. I lunged forward, grabbing the attacker's arm with both hands. He swung wildly, catching me across the cheek with a backhand that sent me sprawling to the ground. Pain exploded, metallic tang filling my mouth. But it was enough of a distraction. Carter wrenched the weapon free, tossing it across the yard before driving his fist into the man's chest. Guards stormed in, batons cracking against bodies, shouts filling the air. In the chaos, someone yanked me up by the collar, dragging me back against the fence. My vision swam, my cheek throbbing, but all I could see was Carter, blood on his knuckles, sweat dripping down his temple, his chest heaving as they pulled him away. "Lock down," a guard barked, shoving us back toward the building. Hours later, back in the cell, the silence was deafening. My cheek was swollen, my ribs aching, but I barely felt it. Carter sat on the bunk across from me, his hands bandaged from the fight. "You shouldn't have jumped in," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "You would have been stabbed," I shot back. His eyes burned into mine. "So what? You think I couldn't handle it?" "That's not the point." I snapped, louder than I meant to. I couldn't just stand there and watch. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Then, slowly, Carter's expression shifted. The anger softened, replaced by something I couldn't quite name, something raw, almost tender. "You don't even see it, do you?" he said quietly. "See what?" He leaned forward, his face inches from mine, his eyes locking onto mine with a force that stole my breath. "The way you look at me. The way you throw yourself into danger for me. You think this is just survival?" My mouth went dry. I opened it, closed it, searching for words. But nothing came. His hand lifted slightly as if to touch me, but he stopped himself, letting it fall back to his lap. His voice dropped lower. "You're not ready to admit it. Not yet." The words cut through me, leaving me trembling. Because he was right. And then, before I could process any of it, the cell door slammed open. 2 guards stepped inside. Carter Reynolds, one of them barked. "Pack it up. You're being moved." The sound of the guards' boots echoed in the hallway long before they stopped outside our cell. I remember the way Carter's jaw tightened, how his shoulders went stiff the moment they called his name. It was like he already knew what was coming, and that scared me more than the order itself. "Reynolds, pack it up. You're being transferred," the taller guard barked, his tone clipped, rehearsed. Transferred. The word cut through me sharper than any blade. I shot to my feet, panic rising fast. Transferred where? Why? The guard didn't even look at me. "Not your business, inmate." Carter stood slowly, deliberately, his eyes flicking toward me for just a second. I saw everything in that look: anger, fear, something softer buried beneath, but he said nothing. He started gathering his things, what little he had: a couple of books, rolled-up clothes, a deck of cards worn thin. His movements were calm, too calm, as if he knew showing anything else would cost him. I felt like I was watching the floor crumble beneath me. Just hours ago, I'd nearly lost him to a knife in the yard. Now I was losing him to something else entirely. An order, a decision made by men who didn't even know what we meant to each other. "You can't just take him," I blurted, stepping forward. "He didn't do anything wrong." The second guard shoved me back hard, my shoulders slamming against the bunk. "Sit down before you make this harder on yourself." My chest burned with rage, but Carter's voice cut through it. Calm, steady, commanding. "Daniel, stop." I froze. He looked at me then, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were the only thing keeping me from collapsing. "It's just a transfer," he said evenly. "I'll be fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. My throat tightened as I watched him zip up his bag. For weeks, he had been my anchor in this place, the one person who made me feel like I wasn't disappearing. And now, in a single moment, they were tearing that away. The guards cuffed him, his hands locked in front of him, and started toward the door. Carter paused, turning his head back slightly. His gaze caught mine one last time, heavy with everything he couldn't say aloud. My stomach twisted painfully. And then he was gone. The silence that filled the cell afterward was unbearable. Every corner screamed of his absence: the empty top bunk, the missing books on the shelf, even the way the air felt colder without his presence. I sat on my bed for what felt like hours, staring at the wall, trying to breathe past the ache in my chest. Days blurred together after that. The routines were the same, but everything felt different. At chow, I ate alone. In the yard, I kept to the edges, scanning faces, half hoping, half dreading that I'd see him again. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, every brush of his hand against mine. And I hated myself for missing him this much. One afternoon, I overheard two inmates talking in the corridor. Reynolds got moved to Block D, heard they're cracking down hard over there. My chest tightened. Block D. That meant fewer privileges, harsher guards, more violence. I couldn't stop imagining him alone in a new cell, surrounded by men who didn't know him like I did, men who wouldn't hesitate to test him. I wanted to see him. Needed to. But transfers meant walls, barriers, regulations designed to keep us apart. Still, I searched for glimpses in the yard, hoping for a break in routine, a stolen second across the distance. Then one evening during chow, it happened. I was sitting at the end of the long metal table when a group from Block D was brought in. My heart nearly stopped when I saw him. Carter. His hair a little longer, jawline sharper, a bruise shadowing his cheek. But it was him. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the noise of clattering trays and shouting guards faded. He gave me the faintest nod, so small no one else would notice, but enough to send a rush of heat through me. I wanted to run to him, to ask if he was okay, to say everything I'd been holding in. But the guards barked orders, shoving the groups to opposite ends of the cafeteria. I barely touched my food. My eyes kept darting to him, memorizing every detail, afraid it might be the last time I saw him. When the call came to stand and leave, I hesitated, desperate for another second. And that's when it happened. As we filed out, Carter shifted in line, just enough to pass near me. His hand brushed against mine, quick, subtle, gone in an instant, but I felt it like a spark in my veins. I turned sharply, but the guards were already shouting, pushing us forward. Carter's face disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by the sea of uniforms. But that single touch carried more than any words could. It told me he was still there, still fighting, still with me, even if everything around us was pulling us apart. That night, lying in my bunk, I pressed my palm against my chest where his hand had grazed mine. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it, really feel it, because it might be all I'd get. And as the lights dimmed and the prison fell into restless silence, a terrifying thought lodged itself in my mind. What if that was the last time I ever touched him? Weeks passed after that fleeting touch in the cafeteria. Weeks of silence, of restless nights, of scanning every crowd for his face and coming up empty. The absence carved into me deeper than I ever thought possible. I told myself I'd adapt, that I'd get used to it, just another prison routine to endure. But the truth was simpler and harsher. I missed him. Desperately. Then one morning, fate bent in my favor. The guards lined us up for work detail, assigning groups to scrub floors and paint walls in one of the older blocks. I kept my head down as always, until I heard a voice that froze me in place. Daniel. I turned and there he was. Carter. Standing a few feet away, bucket in hand, chains rattling faintly at his wrists. He looked different, thinner, tired, but his eyes, they still carried that steady fire I'd memorized. My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then we were assigned to the same corridor, scrubbing the same cracked tiles side by side while guards barked orders at the far end. It felt like a cruel joke, being so close and yet unable to speak freely. Still, Carter leaned closer, his voice barely audible above the scrape of brushes. I thought they'd broken you. I shook my head, swallowing hard. Not yet. For the next hour, we worked in silence, but our shoulders brushed, our hands crossed paths, and in those fleeting touches, entire conversations passed between us. My heart pounded with every stolen second. When the guards finally stepped outside for a smoke, Carter moved fast. He set his brush down, leaned against the wall, and looked at me with an intensity that pinned me where I stood. I need to know, he said quietly. Are you going to keep pretending? My throat went dry. Pretending what? He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the tension in his jaw. That you don't feel it. That I imagined all of this. I couldn't answer. My chest ached with the weight of everything I'd been holding back, the nights of longing, the fear of what it meant, the shame I thought would swallow me whole. But in that moment, with no one watching, all I saw was him. The man who had defended me, who had touched me without fear, who had made me question every boundary I'd built around myself. I whispered it before I could stop myself. I do feel it. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw the wall around him crack. Say it again. I feel it, I repeated, louder now, my voice trembling but certain. The silence stretched, heavy and full, until Carter reached out. His fingers brushed mine, tentative at first, then firmer, grounding me. My body trembled, not from fear this time, but from the relief of finally admitting what I'd buried for so long. Good, he said softly. Because I've been waiting for you to say it. The sound of footsteps jolted us apart. The guards were back, shouting orders, herding us down the hall. My heart raced, but inside, something had shifted. The secret was no longer a secret. That night, lying alone in my bunk, I replayed every word, every touch, every glance. For the first time since I'd been locked behind these walls, I didn't feel caged. I felt alive. Over the following weeks, Carter and I found ways to steal moments. A glance across the yard, a brush of hands during chow, whispers in the rare seconds the guards weren't paying attention. None of it was enough, but it was everything to us. And then came the night that changed everything. A storm raged outside, thunder shaking the windows, rain pounding against the roof. The power flickered, plunging the block into darkness for a few brief seconds. In the chaos, I felt a hand slip into mine. Carter's. Firm, steady, pulling me close in the pitch-black silence. For that heartbeat of time, there were no guards, no bars, no prison. Just us. When the lights snapped back on, we stood apart, but the electricity lingered, humming through me long after. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Transfers, fights, time, they could take him away again at any moment. But I know this. I'm not the same man who walked into this cell months ago. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm feeling. I'm living. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what that means. Carter taught me that. He taught me that sometimes, in the unlikeliest places, you find the person who makes you see yourself clearly. Who makes you stop running from the truth. And the truth is simple. I wanted him. I still do. And no matter what these walls try to strip from me, they can't take that away. As I lie here tonight, I realize something else too. This story isn't just about us. It's about courage. The courage to admit what you feel. The courage to reach for it, even when it terrifies you. So I'll leave you with this. What are you running from? What truth are you burying, hoping no one notices? Maybe it's time to face it. To say it out loud. To let yourself feel, even when it's risky, even when the world tells you not to. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't losing someone else. It's losing yourself by staying silent. Backhand index pointing right. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and hit the notification bell. Stay with us for more stories that dig deep, challenge fear, and remind you that even in the darkest places, love finds a way.